Welcome to the Calm Analysts channel. Boris Zinghausen is with you. Today is May 26th. Here are the main news stories at this moment. Let's start right away with the threat of strikes on Kyiv on decision-making centers and the call for foreign diplomats to leave Kyiv. Here is the wording from the Russian Foreign Ministry. Strikes on Russia have filled the cup of patience to the brim, and Russian forces are beginning to systematically strike Kyiv. Filled the cup of patience to the brim. So that's what they call Putin's suitcases. I understand that strikes on Russian ports, on oil refineries, on Moscow, it hurts and it's frightening, and apparently someone there has really, let's say, overfilled the cup of patience. But here is another important quote. In connection with the fact that the aforementioned targets, that is, decision-making centers, are scattered throughout Kyiv, we warn foreign citizens. Leave Kyiv, and residents of the Ukrainian capital do not approach military and administrative infrastructure sites. Everyone just rushed to flee Kyiv, everyone just rushed. And a bit later I'll share the response from several European embassies, including the American one. There will be an unpleasant answer for Putin. So what has changed with this statement? The Russians said, we will strike Kyiv. What, they weren't striking Kyiv before? It's just that the embassies weren't warning anyone before. They were hitting just the same before, but now they've given a warning. What has changed at all? Are they going to use different missiles or some other kind of drones? Who are you trying to scare, you ghouls, in the 5th year of a full-scale war? But the advisor to the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, Serhiy Bezkresnov, gave a rather concise answer. I think after this answer, Muscovites will have an unpleasant feeling. Ukraine will respond symmetrically, and it will be very painful for Russians. Well, if it's symmetrical, then for strikes on Kyiv, there will be strikes on Moscow. I think that's clear to everyone. And it will be especially painful for Muscovites. We have already clearly demonstrated that we can reach Moscow. Our drones have successfully made it to the heart of the city. Oh wait, there is a sudden emergency alert notification. Well, it looks like the bald scum is throwing another one of his violent tantrums again. Let me check what the alert is about, and then we'll continue. So the fact that our drones reach Moscow is undeniable. But Moscow hasn't been hit by missiles yet. That will be a completely new experience. And there are missiles, and they will definitely fly there. So there is a counter-proposal for Muscovites. I think someone will announce this officially very soon. Leave the city, take your children with you. This is no longer a joke. In fact, the statement by the advisor to the Minister of Defense about symmetrical strikes is about the same thing. I think that very soon we will see how multi-million Moscow will try to squeeze into the metro or into shelters. And yet Putin doesn't even sound the alarm for them. Why would he? And he won't. Just watch. And now let's talk about how European diplomats responded to Putin. European diplomats are staying in Kyiv despite Putin's warnings, despite the fact that he's supposedly filling up some cups of patience there. This was stated by the European Union ambassador to Ukraine, Ms. Katarina Maternova. And I quote, Russia is once again threatening diplomats and foreigners, urging us to leave Kyiv, but we are not going anywhere. She called such threats a sign not of strength, but of desperation. The more aggressively and threateningly the Kremlin behaves, the clearer it becomes that Putin's regime understands it cannot break Ukraine's resilience or the support of its partners. This is important. Kyiv will stand, Ukraine will stand, and so will we, declared Ms. Maternova. Well, this is a very important statement. It shows that no one is afraid of Putin anymore, and all these convulsions of the Botox jellyfish on strings are perceived as agony. Thank you to European politicians and diplomats for your clear stance. And Poland reacted even more harshly. Poland will consider Russian strikes on its diplomats in Kyiv as deliberate. Let me quote, "We will regard any attack on Polish diplomatic missions as targeted and deliberate," stated the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it turns out that no one was afraid of Putin. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important. You can do it right now. We are fighting against Putin's propaganda. Let's do it together. And let me remind you, everyone who subscribes will have soft and silky hair. So go ahead and subscribe. Lavrov also called on Marco Rubio to evacuate the staff of the US Embassy in Kyiv. He personally called Marco, saying, "Take your staff away. Putin is very scary, very angry." And you know, Putin reminds me of, well, there are these kinds of characters in fights who haven't actually fought anyone yet. Hold me back, you better hold me back, or else I'll get him, I'll kill him. Call everyone and tell them how scary I am. But do you know how the US responded? They refused to evacuate their staff from Kyiv. Rubio made it clear to the Russians that they see right through them. Rubio's quote, They, the Russians, sent notifications to all the embassies, and I think he just called me personally to say so. They informed all the embassies. Kyiv will become a very dangerous place, Rubio said. However, the Secretary of State added, Kyiv has been a very dangerous place for several years now. Well, in short, Lavrov, put away your ticket puncher. No one fell for your scare tactics. Let's put it simply, so what's actually happening? And what is this escalation all about? The point is that Putin's Russia has reached the most dangerous point for itself since the beginning of the war. The economy is overheated, resources are being burned up, and the personnel and technological crisis can no longer be concealed. Even the propaganda can't keep up anymore. Just look at Kiselyov's sad face, at Solovyov's sad face. They're always mumbling something like, nobody believes them anymore. That's exactly why Moscow is becoming more and more nervous, more and more aggressive. The more terrified a paper rat is when cornered, the more aggressive it becomes. And the recent strikes on purely civilian targets in the center of Kyiv, the threats to diplomatic missions, this is real hysteria. Moreover, both Europeans and Americans, judging by their statements, see it exactly this way. Against this backdrop, Putin is not looking for a way out of the war, but for a scenario of sharp escalation that would allow him to turn the situation around through fear. That is, not with resources, not with money, not with some kind of super advanced weapon, but specifically with fear, chaos, and raising the stakes. The Kremlin still hopes that it can win not by defeating Ukraine directly, but by destroying the unity of the West, by shaking the European community with fear and forcing it to stop helping Ukraine. The closer the risk of defeat becomes for the Kremlin, the more hysteria, threats, terror, and attempts to project this sense of invincibility there will be. This is the agony of a regime that realizes time has already started working against it, and there is catastrophically little time left. The most interesting thing is that in this too, Putin is copying his predecessor, Hitler. In other words, he is following the playbook to the letter. When it became clear to Hitler that the Eastern Front was collapsing and the Allies had landed in Normandy, Hitler did not look for a way out. He raised the stakes. That is, before his defeat in 1944 to 1945, Hitler played his last trump cards. The V-1 and V-2 rockets against London, threats of superweapons, Wunderwaffe. You could say, that was Hitler's last-ditch effort. And we all know very well how that ended. The ghoul ended his life in a bunker. By the way, if you say this phrase, it applies to only two figures in history, the one who has already done it and the one who will do it soon. And it's also important to remember one key detail after all these threats. The Russians' arsenal for striking Ukraine hasn't changed, but Ukraine's arsenal has increased significantly. Each new strike on the Russian Federation will be more powerful and massive than the previous one. This has been proven by our drones, and soon it will be proven by our missiles as well. And you know what else I find interesting? The Chinese embassy, which is just a couple 100 meters away from the decision-making centers from the Verkhovna Rada, from the government quarter. Are they planning to evacuate from there? Today, for example, China made a statement about de-escalation, which basically called on Russia not to do anything foolish. If you live closer to Mariinsky Park, take a look at what's happening at the Chinese embassy. Are they leaving or not? Interesting. And write about it in the comments. And here's yet another proof of agony. Putin has signed a whole series of laws, including a law granting the head of state the right to deploy armed forces abroad to protect detained Russians. So in the end, Putin signed it. It passed through the State Duma, and now Putin has signed it. Well, everything is clear here. This is the legalization of military intervention if, in Russia's opinion, someone abroad is illegally detained or arrested, like, be afraid of me, I'm an evil, fearsome underground commander, not just a cowardly old man who dyes his eyebrows with Leningrad brown mascara and powders himself with, what was it? With ballet powder. I'm so scary. I can send in troops and, capture the arrested Russians. Putin signed another law that empowers the police to protect historical truth and prevent the diminishment of the people's heroism in defending the fatherland. But here the wording is so vague that the police are essentially given unlimited rights to interpret any statement however they want. And also, probably the most important law in this package, well, for Putin of course it's important, is the law that doubles the overtime limit in Russia from 120 to 240 hours per year. This is a crucial indicator. Here everything is really simple. 240 hours of overtime per year is an extra month of working time without any pay raise, without any new rights for workers, just more work. The economic context is very simple. The civilian industry in Russia is experiencing a severe labor shortage. Because of mobilization and migration, they need to squeeze everything out of those who remain, adding an extra month of overtime. By the way, this is an archaic Soviet model of labor heroism. So Putin is trying to play the Soviet narrative. Everything for the front, everything for victory. We'll work overtime. But the difference is enormous. No one attacked Russia. What front? What victory? No one attacked you. Fight for Putin for free? No one's that foolish. Just like no one will work for free. And there's another important telling bill that instantly turned Russian bankers' hair gray. Putin signed a law to write off the debts of participants in the war with Ukraine who signed a contract from May of this year. So first he drove the country into poverty, forced the common people deep into debt and loans, and then promises to write off those debts if they go fight against Ukraine. What a simple scheme, isn't it? But there's a question. Who is going to pay for this party? Who's going to compensate the creditors? The banks, of course, will now say thank you, in quotation marks. They already have record levels of loan defaults, and now they're going to start writing off debts as well. Well, or I don't know, maybe in the Kremlin they'll just start printing money with all the consequences that come with that. But it's already clear that they're playing their last cards. He's afraid to announce mobilization, but has already started using these kinds of methods, writing off debts. And here's the question. When will Russians have their deposits frozen? It's really just a matter of time now, a matter of the near future. Can you imagine how upset those who signed a contract before May, before this law was passed, must feel right now? They'll die just the same as those who signed after, only their loans won't be written off. Now that's a real insult. That's how Putin has divided the ghouls into two groups. Meanwhile, Ukraine and Ukrainians continue to eliminate the ghouls who came to our land, driving Putin to madness. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for Ukraine's defense forces. And today, we continue raising funds for the Battalion of Unmanned Systems of the 61st Separate Mechanized Brigade. We are raising funds for drone repeaters so that our drones can fly farther and strike more accurately. The fighters are currently stationed in one of the hottest areas near Huliaipol. They have already stopped more than one Russian assault and are simply burying the occupiers in Ukrainian soil. Our defenders have recorded a video. Please take a look.
Бажаємо міцного козацького, непереможні українці. Ми 61-й МБР, батальйон безпілотних систем, боронимо нашу землю на Запорізькому напрямі. Звертаємось до Бориса Тизенгаузена і його аудиторії з проханням допомогти зібрати нам кошти на ретранслятори, які забезпечують нам та нашим пташкам та наземним роботизованим комплексам постійний зв'язок. Тож величезне прохання до всіх небайдужих долучитись до нашої потреби, а ми будемо і надалі відбивати у ворога бажання лізти на нашу землю. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
І смерть ворогам! І разом до перемоги! Дякуємо!
Let's help the soldiers of the 61st Brigade. You know, when I talked to them, there was this sense of calm. He says, Boris, we need help. We'll take care of the occupiers. Everything is going according to plan, but we need help. Let's help them. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There are mono, private, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. And there's always a QR code in the corner for those watching on other channels. It also leads to the donation page. In every episode, a huge thank you from me and from the hundreds of our soldiers whom you've already helped. Together, we are a great force. Thank you so much. Here's another interesting piece of news. It turns out that Russia launched 2 Oreshnik missiles at Ukraine on the night from Saturday to Sunday. The first launch was unsuccessful. There are no analogs. The Oreshnik struck the temporarily occupied territories in the Avdiivka area. That's in the suburbs of Donetsk. And after the failed first launch, there was a second one, which struck Biletserkva. So there were 2 Oreshnik missiles, and with one of them, Putin struck Russian positions. This is not a joke. The monitoring channel E-Radar recorded the first launch around 1 o'clock in the morning. At first, there was no information about the strike. Analysts began to doubt the data. Later, it turned out that the Oreshnik hit a temporarily occupied area in the vicinity of Avdiivka. In other words, the Oreshnik missile flew back to the Russians, right into the nest where they gather. But the Oreshnik has a fundamental problem. Let me remind you, when Russia says, well, right now it's without a warhead, but just wait until we arm it, and then with a regular charge or even a nuclear one. The Oreshnik has a fundamental problem and no upgrade can fix it. The Russians don't know how to fit a non-nuclear warhead into this Oreshnik, and they can't do it with a nuclear one either. Conventional explosives under these hypersonic loads are simply an engineering nightmare. That's why they're just launching dummies. And the Oreshnik is one of Putin's most expensive and useless fireworks, costing tens of millions of dollars. And here another historical analogy comes to mind. Every Hitler or little Hitler needs to have their own Oreshnik or their own Dora cannon. I think many people probably remember studying that giant Dora cannon in school. This was the Nazi supercannon with a caliber, I think, of 800 millimeters, the largest artillery piece in world history. Years and enormous resources of the Third Reich were spent on its development, production, and transportation, just like with the Oreshnik. Throughout the entire war, the Dora fired, I think, about 40 shots and did not affect a single strategic outcome. Absolutely. It required a crew of 1,400 people and an entire railway infrastructure just for its maintenance. In 1945, the Germans blew up the cannon themselves so it wouldn't fall into the hands of the Allies, the most expensive and most useless weapon of World War II by all accounts. And one more piece of news. The Russian Foreign Ministry has had a lot of work lately. Lavrov is running circles at the racetrack, working up a sweat. The Russian Foreign Ministry has demanded that the Czech authorities immediately release the detained Metropolitan Hilarion. We regard the incident with the Metropolitan as a deliberate, orchestrated provocation aimed at discrediting both the Metropolitan himself and, through him, Orthodoxy as a whole. We demand the unconditional and immediate release of Metropolitan Hilarion and an end to the fabricated proceedings. I think they will release the Metropolitan. But let me remind you that the Czech authorities stopped the Metropolitan's car for inspection and found 4 containers with white powder inside. Do you know what the Metropolitan said right away? He said, "These prohibited substances are not mine." How does he know what kind of substances are in there? Especially since the examination has not yet determined what kind of prohibited substances they are. And Putin has just signed a law that now allows him to use an entire army to free this drug-dealing Metropolitan. Actually, as I mentioned in yesterday's episode, this Metropolitan is a textbook example of a representative of the Russian Orthodox Church. He was accused of harassing his cell attendant, demoted in the hierarchy, and now he's also been caught with magic powder. It feels like the higher a priest is in the ROC hierarchy, the more sins he has to commit. Take the chief priest, Patriarch Kirill. He probably works part-time in hell, or maybe not even part-time. And the head of Russia's FSB, Bortnikov, made several statements. You see, they're going on all fronts now. Release the ghouls, demons, all sorts of devils. Here they go. Let's have a Metropolitan with coke. Let's have Bortnikov with some craziness. Bring it all on. Putin's army, go ahead. The head of the FSB made the following statement, that Ukraine is a testing ground for new types of weapons, for training military artificial intelligence systems, and for working out new forms and methods of warfare under a foreign flag. I honestly don't see any downsides to this. On the contrary, it's a great program. Ukraine announces, bring your new weapons. Want to test them? Let's test them on the occupiers. Russian biotrash is being disposed of in Ukraine, including with experimental types of weapons. It's all advantageous. Another statement from Bortnikov. NATO continues its program to create selective biological weapons in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Laboratories are also operating on the territory of the CIS. This is an old story, but just in case, let me remind you that the selective action weapon Bortnikov is talking about is a weapon that can, for example, kill a specific race. Remember how the Russians spoke from the UN podium about mosquitoes that would infect only Russians with incurable diseases through their bites? Well, this is a continuation of that. I also want to ask a question about biolabs. When the Russians invaded Ukraine, they reached Kyiv in the first few days. You probably remember that, right? Why didn't they capture and show at least one biolab, even a tiny one? When they occupied Kherson, why wasn't there a single biolab there? Where are they all? Another statement. The US and Israel eliminated members of Iran's top leadership using data obtained through software backdoors in Tehran's video surveillance systems. And this, perhaps, is Putin's deepest and greatest fear. The real reason for shutting down the internet in Russia. Here is that statement. So that, God forbid, they don't use the cameras to figure out where the balding nest is, where he's running around in his heels, and don't hit it with a missile. After the elimination of the Iranian leadership, and even before that, after the elimination of General Soleimani, Putin developed a real fear and paranoia about a similar scenario. Actually, I think it would be good to periodically publish videos from hacked cameras in Moscow and St. Petersburg, somewhere around the Kremlin, so that the Botox maggot panics even more. But that's not all. There's also another statement from the FSB director. Do you know what he accused the West of? Of preparing color revolutions using artificial intelligence. Let me quote, Western intelligence agencies are creating a network of digital laboratories in CS countries to provoke color revolutions, said FSB Chief Bortnikov. Well, that's something new. Now, I guess they'll be looking for digital laboratories. They didn't find any biolabs, so now they'll look for digital ones. So, you know, Russia is led by a group of musty, mothballed, narrow-minded KGB men. Most of them are over 70. Bortnikov is 74, Patrushev is 74, Bastrikin is 72, Putin is around 72, Narishkin is 71, Matvienko is 77. Putin doesn't use the internet. For them, everything new, modern, artificial intelligence, all of it is a threat. A handful of moral degenerates with black souls, clinging to power with crooked fingers, hating everything new, hating everything young, hating life itself. These are the people who run the Russian Federation. And you, friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel. Don't forget, I ask you very much, let's help our defenders from the 61st Brigade. Our help is extremely necessary for them right now. The link to donate is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.